Hello and welcome back to the course Private Pilot Maneuvers. Today we'll do some slow flights. So we're actually flying, as the name implies, at a very slow speed. Why are we doing this? Because we would like to understand flight characteristics and the flight control feel near a stall. It's very important that you as a pilot know these flight characteristics and also you know how it feels if the airplane nears a stall. Because of course this is one key to avoid a stall in the first place. Also, you should be able to fly the airplane, of course, through the entire range of its operating speeds, so also at very slow speeds. And flying the plane or practicing flying the airplane at that slow speeds really helps recognizing an impending stall. Also due to the feel of the airplane, but also due to vibrations, sound of the airplane, and so on. And you really need to know this to avoid actually stalling the airplane. Now, how slow is slow? Well, of course, that depends on the airplane. It's flying actually at an angle of attack that's just under the buffet angle of attack. So if you're near a stall, the airplane starts to buffet. We'll talk about that in the stalling lesson. And just at that speed where this buffet begins, or just the moment before the stall warning comes on, or maybe even intermittent stall warning, that's the speed we would like to fly for our slow flights. Okay, let's briefly look at the theory. Well, here on this graph, you can see actually the curves for the drag and the lift coefficient. Also, we can see the speed that we have talked about it briefly in, the angle of attack that we've talked about in the descending lesson for the maximum lift to drag ratio, LD max. And also we see CL max, so the maximum lift coefficient. This is just the point then beyond that the stall actually occurs. So you can see that increase in lift with increasing angle of attack, but then at the point of CL max, the curve of the lift coefficient drops rapidly, and that's when the stall happens. This is when the airflow over the wing then has separated and it's not producing lift anymore. All right, so one important thing to note is that if you're flying, which is normally the case in many flight conditions, in normal flight conditions, if you're flying faster than LD max, you're kind of in front of the power curve, so to speak, which means even if you just a small increase in power will increase your speed. But if you're operating below the LD max speed, so actually that's what we're going to do in slow flight, then you're behind the power curve. And what does it mean? You have a lot of induced drag because to fly that low you need a high angle of attack, you probably have a high pitch, and the high angle of attack will cause a lot of induced drag. And as the angle of attack gets really high, this induced drag gets really high. So eventually you might even reach a point where you have applied maximum power, but you're still not accelerating. And the only way to get out of this situation is by reducing the angle of attack. And that's why at speeds behind the power curve, you should adjust your altitude with power. So if you want to climb, you add power. If you want to descend, you reduce power, and you adjust your speed with the elevator. So if you're getting too fast, you pull back a little bit. And that's how you should also control your slow flight. Keep your altitude with power and speed by adjusting the pressure on the elevator. All right, so in slow flight, we have a situation where we're flying at, well, slow speed, a high angle of attack, probably high power due to the big drag. And first of all, we're trying it at a constant altitude. Of course, you can also fly climbs and descents during slow flight. It will at first be quite difficult to maintain your altitude and attitude. As you're approaching stall speed, the controls will become somewhat mushy, so to speak, sloppy, because there's just less airflow over the flight control surfaces. So, as I've said, normally just fly at a slow speed, maybe 5 to 10 knots above the stalling speed, so maybe just at the speed where the stall warning horn would actually come on. I also tried in various configurations, of course, with flaps, without flaps, and so on. If you have retractable gear, also try it with the gear out, then you have even more drag. If you practice this, of course, do this at a high altitude, just to have some margin for error in case you inadvertently stall the airplane. Clear the area as usual, and then, as you're flying along, just reduce power. Now the airplane will decelerate. Don't descend, just keep your altitude and decelerate. You will need to bring your nose up more and more as you get slower. And then eventually, shortly before you reach your target airspeed, remember to increase power again. You'll probably, as I've said, need a lot of power to maintain that slow speed with the nose up high that much. And then try to maintain the altitude. Be aware that you will now, as the nose is that high up, the propeller effects will be very noticeable, so you will need right rudder to compensate for them. If you notice you start to descend, just add some power to climb again, and vice versa. If you notice you get too slow, just get the nose down a little bit to accelerate, and vice versa as well. So altitude by power and airspeed by elevator. If you're flying turns, of course this is possible in slow flight as well, just be sure to use only little bank. We have heard in the turning lesson that increased bank increases our stalling speed. And that's not what we want, because we are flying so slow already, so that if you're now introducing a large bank, we might stall. So just fly your turns with just very little bank and keep them coordinated, so use your rudder. Now for the recovery from the slow flight, just get your nose down to accelerate, set the power as needed, and then just transition to normal forward flight again. Okay, so what are the common errors that are seen during flight instruction when performing slow flights? First of all, very common is altitude loss, which can be caused by too little back pressure or too little power. Also, the opposite, so too much power or too much back pressure, having the airplane climb away. Very common is also the use of insufficient right rudder. So as I've said, be aware of the propeller effects. Also anticipate any needed changes in angle of attack and at the same time pitch attitude when you're changing the configuration of the airplane. So for example, if you are extending the flaps or retracting the flaps during a slow flight. Also, if you're flying along for a longer time, that's especially important to trim the airplane. Another common error is failure to trim properly and having to keep all this back pressure all the time. All right, so this concludes the lesson about slow flights. It's actually a preparation lesson for our next lesson about stalls as well. And I'd say let's try it in the airplane. See you there.